quick. So Parshat Bamidbar Drash 2020. This is the first portion of the book of Numbers, the book actually called Bamidbar. In Hebrew, it's the fourth book of the Torah, of the Torah, of course, first five of the Bible. In Hebrew, the book of Numbers is called Bamidbar, and it means in the desert or in the wilderness. So throughout this drash, I'm going to be saying in the desert and in the wilderness, kind of synonymously. So just keep up. Many of us have felt like we've been in the desert during this global pandemic that is COVID-19. But I would dare to say that we have actually been in Egypt, not yet the desert. I think that is the next step. We've been reliant on the direction and the protection of the governments of the world more than ever during this time, and hiding from a plague under the wing, not of God, but under the wing of Pharaoh during this time. And that time is coming to an end. Just a couple days ago, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, declared that the houses of worship are essential. Baruch HaShem for that, and will reopen even if our state governors disagree. This sounds more like a proclamation of Moses than it does a proclamation of Pharaoh. So now we leave Egypt, and we dare not return to what we called normal. We head straight into the unknown, the scariness of the wilderness, the danger of the desert, not knowing where our resources will come from, not even knowing if we're going to make it. But we head into this deserted wilderness together, seeking the voice of God. I find it interesting when we look at the names of the books of the Torah and their meanings. You can almost find a story. Of course, in Genesis is Greek, and it means the origin or the birth. Exodus is Greek, and it means a mass migration. Leviticus is Latin, and it literally means of the Levites. And Numbers, Latin, means being counted. It's actually Numbers is the correct definition is any symbol that represents a counting, but here in the book of Numbers we see it's more specifically about a counting of people, a census, if you will. And Deuteronomos, is Greek. I didn't pronounce it right in Greek, that's okay. It's Greek, and it means repeating of law. Some people it says it means the second law. It's actually not a good translation. It means the repetition of the law, not the second law. It is not in addition to the first law. It is repeating the initial law. But in Hebrew, we'll find some fun meanings too. Genesis is Bereshit, and it means in the beginning, or in the beginnings. Shemot is names, the names. Vaikra is and he called. Bamidbar is in the desert, like our portion today. And last, the fifth book, Deuteronomy, is Devarim. And Devarim is the words, and it's very specific to the words of God. So when you look through this whole thing in the Greek and Latin, it's kind of reads the origin, the mass migration of the Levites, being counted in the census, repeating the law. It's kind of awesome. And then when you look in Hebrew, in the beginning, the names, or the names were there, the names existed, and he called in the desert the words of God. We see a beautiful picture there, of course, in the Brit Hadasha portion this Shabbat, as we just read. We see that these words were spoken by Yeshua as he was tempted. We see the words of God being spoken in the desert all throughout the scriptures. And it's very specific, a very specific people, a very specific place, and very specific words spoken by a very specific God. Many times in my life, I know that I found myself in a desert, a place with seemingly no life at all, just dryness, just no blessing in sight. And sometimes we can even become depressed and down and get anxiety when we can't seem to see life beyond the next dune that we have to climb. Yes, it's in these times of loss that God actually appears to us. He takes the opportunity to appear to us, and he speaks to us. He calls us in the wilderness, and we repeat the law, the word of God, the law of liberty and of life. Interesting that in a place of death, the desert and the wilderness has always been known as a place of death. That is the place where we are to re-utter the law of liberty and life, which is the Torah. So who is this God? Who is this Elohim who seeks those in the desert? And who is this God who even puts people in the desert so he can seek them there? We often see God in the scriptures help take out the enemy. He helps us take out the bad guys. And he saves his people. I mean, who doesn't like a good war story? We see a lot of that in the scripture. And he's even coming back. You know, that when Yeshua returns, he will be the king. He will be a war general. But is war the true likeness of our Creator? Did he create earth and humanity and the angels just so he can have this big bad war so he can win? I don't think so. I don't think harshness and I don't think brutality and killing is at the core of our God. I think it is a side product of free will in which he's instituted. You know, I once heard someone say that God doesn't typically scream at us to get our attention. Instead, he gently knocks at the door, waiting for us to answer. Revelation 3:20 says, "Behold, I stand at the door." God stands. Our God waits. He doesn't forcefully kick the door in, but he'll knock ever so gently, ready to enter when we are ready to open up to him. In his gentleness, like a dove, God will not land where he is not wanted. So he'll leave. If not received, and he'll try again at a later time. You can see this stated in Matthew 3:16. People keep saying, we don't have God in our schools. But like the gentleness of a dove, we have told God not to be in our public school system. So he, as a gentleman, turned and left, and we shut the door. I think we know what the antidote is. King Solomon beautifully describes this idea in one of his poems. He says, "My sister, my bride, I have entered my garden. I am gathering my myrrh and my spices. I am eating my honeycomb along with my honey. I am drinking my wine as well as my milk." She says, "I am asleep, but in my heart I'm awake. Listen, I hear my darling knocking." He says, "Open for me, my sister, my love, my dove, my flawless one. For my head is wet with dew, my hair with the moisture of the night." She responds, "I've removed my coat. Must I put it back on? I've washed my feet. Must I dirty them again?" The man I love put his hand through the hole by the door latch, and my heart began pounding at the thought of him. I got up to open for the man I love. My hands were dripping with myrrh. Pure myrrh ran off my fingers on the handle of the bolt. I opened for my darling, but my darling had turned and gone. My heart had failed me when he spoke. I sought him, but I couldn't find him. I called him, but he didn't answer. The watchmen roaming the city found me. They beat me. They wounded me. They took away my cloak. Those guardians of the walls, I charge you, daughters of Jerusalem, that if you find the man I love, what are you to tell him? That I am sick with love. We see this beautiful picture by Shlomo, and you can actually find this in Songs of Solomon 5, 1 through 8 in the Complete Jewish Bible. When Yeshua came to us, he knocked, and there was a point where it was too late for us to turn around and try to find him again. But even being beaten, trying to find this love that is God, that is Yeshua, the salvation of God. He came and he knocked. And what was our answer initially? I've already taken my jacket off. I've already cleaned my feet. Should I come and get dirty again? It's like going into the wilderness. You're leaving the leeks and the melons and, everything behind. Living in Egypt, being reliant on the government like that, is like a child. In some ways it's good because you don't have to worry about the bills and where's my meal going to come from. But eventually, you must leave the wilderness and mature into an adult. We see that when you're 20 years of old in the Torah, you are accountable as an adult. That means no longer waiting on the world, but waiting on God. Your provision now comes from the Lord and not Pharaoh. We have to make the personal and conscious effort of still quietness if we want to hear God. Sometimes we have to get up and answer the door. The door of our heart only opens from the inside because it has to come from us. This covenant, the covenant relationship with God is a decision that truly is in our hands. We have to be able to be uncomfortable, put our coat back on, dirty our feet up a little bit to enter into covenant from God because it comes from within. Eliyahu also experienced the sweet and tender voice of God while in the desert. He was running from Queen Jezebel. He went out to the cave of Mount Horeb, and a bunch of crazy stuff happened after that. You can find this in 1 Kings 19, 9 through 13. There he went into a cave and spent the night. Then the word of Adonai came to him. He said to him, "What are you doing here, Eliyahu?" He answered, "I've been very zealous for Adonai, the God of armies, because the people of Israel have abandoned your covenant, broken down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. Now I am the only one left, and they're coming after me to kill me too." He said, "Go outside, stand on the mountain before Adonai." And right then and there, Adonai went past. A mighty blast of wind tore through the mountains, tore the mountains apart, and broke the rocks into pieces before Adonai. But Adonai was not in the wind. He caused the wind, but he was not in the wind. He goes on to say, after the wind came an earthquake, but Adonai was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire broke out, but Adonai was not in the fire. And after the fire came a quiet, subdued voice. When Eliyahu heard it, he covered his face with his cloak, stepped out, and stood at the entrance to the cave. Then a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Eliyahu?" Sometimes God initiates these things. He will initiate fires, initiate locusts, initiate global pandemics. He will initiate bondage and slavery and all of these desert experiences in our lives. But he is not in those things. He initiates, but he is not in or of those things. What he's in is that small, quiet, still voice after these disasters happen. He is that calm. He is in that silence. He is the calm after the storm. That is what God is. And he says, "What are you doing here, Eliyahu?" Sometimes it takes a huge, tremendous, cataclysmic event or five to get our attention. Our stubbornness and our pride must be broken and torn down if we are to serve the Lord with our entire being. And sometimes that means smashing the shell that we have built, the shell of our brokenness. Every time we're beat up by the world, beat up by the evil of this world, or by each other, or by ourselves, we put up another brick around our hearts. Sometimes it takes the fires, the earthquakes, and the winds to smash through that so our heart can be revealed to God and that he may be revealed to us. But it's in that small, still voice in the wilderness. God taught the same thing to Melech David, King David. You can find this in Psalms 43:10. "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." This "be still and know" is the key part in this verse. And it will lead to the glorifying of God over the earth. Sometimes we only find this quiet in the desert in our lives. This is the exact reason why God took Israel away in the quietness, in the wilderness, in Midbar. He took his people away from the distractions of daily Egyptian life, of daily government life. There, he provided us with food and with water. He even preserved our clothes from not falling apart. He took care of every need like a father would. It was like a sort of return to the Garden of Eden, where God provided the first humans, Adam and Chava, were the first humans without the need to sow, to harvest. It was an early jubilee and an abundance of freedom, truly freedom from everything. It's crazy to think of the Garden of Eden, thinking of these rivers, these 4 rivers coming out, and these beautiful trees with all of this fruit and all of this food, and death was not there. There was no death and sickness. And the desert where there's hardly any food, there's no water. We got to find some weird dolphins to build the tabernacle, and there's snakes. Did anybody mention the snakes? And the giants and the other people that want to kill us. How is this like the Garden of Eden at all? Like the Garden of Eden. And during the Jubilee year, in the desert, we ate what grew of its own. We ate God's food. We ate the bread of heaven. That's the difference. In the times with Yeshua, we'll be eating of the bread of heaven. We'll be sustained by the Lord again. That's what makes it the same as the Garden of Eden. Even if at times in the desert, these terrible situations in our life, we don't see it in that light. We don't see it as the Garden of Eden and blessing with the snakes and the giants and there's no Wi-Fi. But it is like the Garden of Eden when the Lord provides for you. The whole reason Israel was that Israel would cease from the mundane activities and sit with God at the foot of Mount Horeb and learn, just as Eliyahu did. God provided Israel, and Eliyahu wasn't of Israel, just to let you know. He was one of the greatest prophets of Israel and was not even an Israelite. I love it. God provided Israel with every need for the simple goal of getting them away from the distractions, getting their attention so that they would sit simply and learn from him. There's this whole parallel between being in the wilderness, hearing that small quiet voice, and learning straight from God. This is another reason why we actually have the Holy Shabbat. Shabbat is a time where we stop our daily grind and confusion and being in the world and everyday activities in order to sit with God and with each other and learn, like we're doing right now. On Shabbat, we have the opportunity to learn through prayer, to learn through service, and learn through fellowship with others and with God. In Hebrew, when we talk about wilderness, desert, Bamidbar, ba is in, and midbar is wilderness. It's a word that actually draws its root from the word debar, which is word in Hebrew, but specifically refers to the word as spoken by God. It is the very word that we find in John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This word is also related to the verb ladavar, means to speak. From this word, the sages deduct that it's the undistracted, still dependency on God in the desert, that God's voice is heard the clearest in our lives. I completely agree. I often see people, they want to sing when they hear the Aaronic benediction. They want to sing along with it. Or they want to shout along with the shofar blast. How many times have we seen a congregation or something and the shofar is going and everyone's, whoa! But doing so actually robs you of the fullness of absorbing these blessings. Sometimes somebody's praying a blessing over you and you want to pray one back and it's not your turn. sometimes in our lives, we are meant to receive the blessing. Some of us, sometimes somebody's trying to gift you something, some money, some food, something, and you want to do something in return. You are robbing yourself of absorbing that blessing. It's not your turn to give. The Lord has put you in a situation to receive, and that takes the breaking down of the pride to be able to receive. You know, we all have difficult times in our lives that certainly could qualify as desert times. I'm sure you're thinking of several already times in your life where there was no water, there was no food. Even if it's just spiritual and symbolically, it definitely felt like a desert, a place you were stuck in your life. But these are actually times of trials, tribulations, and difficulty. But it's not unlike difficult times of survival in a desert land. It's not that the Lord is not there with you. Trials can be a very good thing. Think of a legal court. If you're innocent and you're being accused of something and you end up going to trial, the truth comes out and your innocence is revealed. Trial can be a very wonderful thing. But in these places in our lives, instead of indulging in the feelings of abandonment and low self-worth, low self-esteem, we should recognize that it is God's blessing on our lives that we would even be in these situations. Him not going from us, but taking everything away from us so that we may come to Him. It's a huge blessing. We should know that these are the times when He's actively separating us from the distraction of the world so that He can have more of a personal time with us, a personal relationship with us. This is the essence of a kadosh life. This is the essence of holiness, being separate from the world. Scripture says true religion is caring for the widows, the orphan, and the poor amongst you, but also being undefiled from the world. God is separating us from the world. I mean, you don't bring your buddies or your boss along on a romantic date with your wife, do you? If you do, we'll probably talk after this. But it's about that one-on-one experience. One-on-one experience. And that is where we find God in the desert. The Midrash, Mabidbar Rabbah, mentions Numbers 1:1. Whoever does not make himself open and free like a wilderness will not be able to acquire wisdom and Torah. This is what the sages say. On this commentary, Matnos Kalna says, humility enables you to learn from everyone and teach everyone. The desert, in many ways, also symbolizes humility, and the Torah can only be learned in the spirit of humility. King David knew about this because he mentioned it in Psalms 34:18. Adonai is near to those with broken hearts. He saves those whose spirit is crushed. Psalms 37:11. But the meek will inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace. Even our master Yeshua said here in Matthew 5:3-6, how blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. How blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. How blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land. How blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. You know, Parshat Bamidbar is always read before Shavuot. This holiday, it allows us to relive the time when Israel humbly sat at the foot of Mount Sinai to receive the Torah from HaShem himself, to relive this Sinai experience in our time today. And we must first pass through the desert and its lessons, at least in a spiritual sense. Shavuot also takes us back to the day when the disciples humbly obeyed the Master's command to stay in Jerusalem, to stay in Jerusalem in spite of the persecution that was definitely coming for them. They became blessed with the Shekhinah, the glory that came to live within them. We find this in Acts chapter 2. So we must also express obedient humility in order to be blessed. with the Spirit of God to dwell within us, to guide us and to comfort us. And those are sometimes that's exactly what we need in these deserts in our lives. We need God dwelling with us. We need a guide, and we need comfort in the desert. But remember, this comes with the smallest of voices, with the faintest of whispers. And sometimes your ears are still ringing from the thunder and the craziness that the world just dished out. But afterwards, it's the gentle voice of the Lord that is calling out to you. Why are you here? What is your purpose? Why have you come? What are you seeking? And in those questions, we find the answers that we are willing to learn at the feet of God. We are disciples of our Master, Yeshua. We will humbly sit at the feet and learn the law of life and liberty. That we have come to the wilderness and we have left the softness of Pharaoh's world and of these world systems. We have left Egypt and our melons and our leeks. We have left bondage and slavery and the comfort that of ourselves to find the true comforter, which is the Ruach HaKodesh, which dwells in us, a beautiful gift of the Lord himself, his own breath. We are here to honor God, to worship God. We're here today to honor the Sabbath, this little tiny piece of the Garden of Eden that we get to experience weekly. And next Sunday, we will experience Shavuot, another little piece of the Garden of Eden. It's in the desert, in the toughest times in our lives, where we want to give up. We want to just lay down in the sand, suck some sand, and go out. But these are the times to hear God's voice. These are the times for the silent prayers, where you speak 10% and you listen 90%. Even if you don't hear anything, maybe you just wait until you hear something. Because sometimes it takes us being stripped from Egypt, everything we thought we knew was right, and being lost in the desert, everything we thought was wrong, to hear the small voice of God, the teaching voice that calls out to us in the desert. Prepare ye the way for the Lord. Make the ways, make the paths straight for the Lord. It's when you hear your calling in your life, your purpose, the reason you've been created, the reason you're listening to this message, and the reason that you're in this community. The reason that you're thrown in this terrible desert in the first place, and that you were even in bondage in the first place. Not just to hear his voice, but to hear his purpose in his voice. To feel the love of God. To emanate the love of God. Throughout all of those in your life. The good news, the gospel, the good news is that all men can enter into covenant with the God of Israel and have a relationship with the God of Israel in this age and the age to come, the Olam Haba, when heaven and earth become one. We have the opportunity to spend 1,000 years with Messiah, with Moshiach ben David, as he comes and rages war on this world but gives us peace. Our lives are to make that way, to set that path ready for the Lord. And it all starts with hearing the small voice, letting your heart that is racing just calm down for a second. Put everything aside. Every doctrine, every idea, everything you've ever been taught. Seek him in the wilderness. You know, I love the American tradition is to relax and go camping. It's kind of an interesting thing. They say to go and experience nature. I'm not looking for a tree. I'm not looking for a squirrel. I'm looking for the creator of that tree and that squirrel. I'm looking for God. In this season, as we go back out into the world, let us not go back into Egypt now that quarantine is ending. Let us go into the wilderness where things are scary, but we're together. Your clothes are going to be fine. You're going to have water. You're going to have food. Don't ask for some quail. Just don't ask. But you're going to be there with God, and you're going to be there with the rest of us, side by side. We will be there together, hand in hand, walking through this desert together. We're not opposing world governments and the Pharaoh in Egypt. We're just simply walking away from it. We're simply entering into God's kingdom, God's government system that he has set up for us. May his Shekinah and his glory just emanate from us this week, all of us. May we find the peace of Shabbat and spread the love of Yeshua. Yeshua is the opportunity. He's like the proposal ring, the opportunity for covenant. What a beautiful thing. May we be blessed this Shavuot, and remember, this is in commemoration of us receiving the Torah and the Spirit, the truth and Spirit, to live not one without the other, but both together. May we hear the voice of God.